Some agents think that nothing kicks in. The clock doesn't start on inspections or well and septic inspections or any of that until you have an underlying sale. That's not true. That's not what the purchase agreement says, unless you stipulate that. Now, if you stipulate that the effective date will be that date that the buyer has accepted an offer, an underlying offer on their home, that's a different matter. And I encourage you that if you have a buyer in that situation, if your buyer's offer is subject to the sale and closing, that you stipulate in the purchase agreement that the effective date shall be that date which they enter into an underlying contract. That will protect your buyers from going out and spending a bunch of money on inspections and then losing it to somebody else because it's still on the market. But if it's not in there, then the effective date is the date that the contract was written. So, I'm going to go back to where I was. Okay. So, again, within 10 days after the effective date, the seller is going to arrange at the seller's expense an inspection of the primary well and the septic and so on and so forth. This really clarifies, in my view, the confusion about whether there's protocol, whether there's not protocol, whether the township, county requires it, and so on. As I read this, there is no reason that to say that this is up to the county whatsoever. It's totally and completely up to the purchase agreement. And then down the bottom, I've also indicated seller to have water tested for PFAS. That's kind of important, especially if you know that there's been some evidence of PFAS in the area and you're on a single well. It's probably a good idea. Petroleum and, in this case, kryptonite. If hazardous levels are found, buyer reserves the right to terminate this contract. Again, there's the consequence for a well and septic inspection that is not acceptable to the buyer. The buyer has the right to terminate. It's very simple. It's very clear. Inspections and investigations. We get this question often, what is an investigation? What does an investigation constitute? Well, the investigations are actually spelled out as those investigations which will allow the buyer to get insurance on the property and whether or not they can use the property for their intended use. In fact, it's in paragraph, if it is the buyer's responsibility to investigate whether the property complies with applicable codes for the intended use and whether they can get homeowners insurance and whether it's in a flood zone. So all of those things are investigations. Other investigations are not really considered investigations. They do not fall within the framework of the purchase agreement. So if there are other issues that your buyer wants to investigate, then you need to stipulate them. If they want to investigate the school system, if they want to look at MEP scores and make a decision to move forward based on MEP scores, for example, that needs to be written into the purchase agreement. I know I'm running a bit long, but I think this might be worthwhile here today. In paragraph 17, I've indicated buyers and sellers agree to employ Star Title for all title insurance and closing services. Again, make sure you get a affiliated business arrangement signed. The property survey paragraph has been changed dramatically in that they no longer include the option for a mortgage sketch, which is not a survey. I like that they have only indicated if you want a survey and who's going to pay for it. Home protection plan. Seller agrees to purchase a home protection plan up to a maximum. Always put in there the cap before you end up paying for, $1,500 or $1,000. That holds true of surveys as well. Surveys can run into thousands of dollars. So before you open up the checkbook, make sure that you understand how much that survey is going to cost. Possession. Closing, let's go here. If agreeable to all parties, closings shall be held not later than 4/12. And I also included down here, a 15-day extension will be permitted only if the lender has given the clear to close. Nowadays, lenders generally do not give clear to close on anything that still requires repairs or changes to a title work, clearing up a cloud on a title work. So that's just to protect your buyer from having a situation where they haven't yet actually gotten a clear to close and they're kicking in a 15-day inspection period. Let's see. Possession. I've said 10 days. We're going to give them 10 days at 0. And then tenancy and sufferance, it gets a lot more expensive, $400 a day, because I want them out of there right now. The other... I've also added the phrase, this offer in its entirety is subject to the seller's acceptance of addendum number 1, which is attached. We've talked about purchase agreement or earnest deposit, and buyer reserves the right to conduct a walk through the property within 48 hours prior to closing to assess the current condition and or completion of repairs. Should there be missing items or property damage or unfinished repairs, the buyer may elect to terminate this contract or negotiate a remedy with the seller through an escrowed monies agreement. If appraisal comes in low, buyer will provide proof of funds to pay up to $5,000 over appraisal if they want to. If they don't, that's fine. That's up to them. That's a matter of negotiation. If the buyer fails to provide proof of funds, seller reserves the right to terminate the contract. In both of those clauses that I added, I wanted to make sure that it was clear that there are consequences. If either of them doesn't perform, the other party has the right to terminate the contract. Escalation clause. This is the language right out of dotloop, and I encourage you, when you are going to write an escalation clause, this is an escalation clause that we've gone over in great detail and run it by Gail Anderson and so on. Escalation clause. Buyer offers purchase price of $200,000 but agrees to escalate the offer to $5,000 more than any and all competing offers, including any competing offers with escalation clauses minus any seller's concessions from bona fide offers with pre-qualified buyers up to a maximum sales price of $225,000. If the escalation clause is implemented, the seller shall provide a copy of competing offers and the pre-qualification letters pertaining to both offers, or to those offers. That's really important. All of those things that I put in there. If they're paying concessions, for example, your offer shouldn't be competing with an offer where the seller is giving the buyer money. And you should have the right to see the pre-qualification letter to make sure that it wasn't a bogus offer written just simply to drive up the price. Number 2 in the addendum is seller agrees to have the title company hold $2,000 in escrow at the closing until all personal property is removed from the house and it is delivered in broom clean condition and void of, in this case, lingering kryptonite. It's just for fun. And then number 3, the seller shall provide an existing survey with all current improvements if available. If no survey is available, the seller shall pay for a survey up to a maximum of $1,200, and this purchase agreement shall be contingent upon the buyer's review and approval in writing of the survey results. Survey to include the location of iron stakes, any and all easements for utilities, rights of way, private road agreements, and recorded or unrecorded easements for ingress to subject property or for any party to travel across subject parcel. Buyer reserves the right to terminate this contract and retain the earnest deposit if the buyer deems the survey unacceptable within 3 days of receiving the survey. Now, there's a lot of stuff in there, obviously, and some of it I put in there for the purpose of an example, so it was a sample to you in creating a comprehensive purchase agreement. Sometimes you aren't going to want to do those things. Sometimes you're not going to say, let's ask for concessions, or let's not do an escalation clause. It's all a matter of negotiation. It's in this market, being a seller's market, it's sometimes a matter of what's going to win the house for your buyer. Ultimately, your objective is to win the house for your buyer and protect their interests with due diligence to make sure that they are protected in terms of what they want. Are they going to have inspections performed? Are those inspections going to reveal something which will cause them ultimately to walk away from the contract? It's been a little bit longer. Oh, we got a question coming in. Longer than usual, but I hope it's been informative. Let's scroll up, and Brian, do you put that clause, number 2, on your addendum in all PAs or homes that have a lot of stuff? Is that another word for garbage, Brian? Yeah, that's a tough one. Again, sometimes sellers are going to take offense at that. And in this market, if another buyer has not put that in there, they may choose that buyer or that offer simply because they haven't asked them for escrow for their house that seems to be have a lot of stuff in it. When you walk into a house and it looks like a hoarder's house, I had one where I walked in, it was literally shoulder high, and I had about this much to walk through the house. I had no idea how this person would ever get all of this stuff out of there other than to have a crane come in and load it up. But if you walk into a house that has a lot of things out in the yard, old mower decks, washing machines, cars, just all sorts of stuff laying around, what are they going to do with that? I mean, if I were a buyer, I would say, I don't want to have to deal with that. And the likelihood is that they're going to have to deal with it when that seller moves out. If you've not protected that buyer in some way by putting some teeth into the contract to say, you have to get that stuff out of there or it's going to cost you $2,000. But again, when you do that, when you put that information in there, it does hurt the marketability or the acceptability of your offer that you're writing because another agent may not put that same language in there. I hope that helps, but particularly important with houses that are full of stuff. So, again, thank you all for joining, and we will see you same time next week.